Hello again, people of the internet. Welcome back to the speaker series presented by the Tabletop Mentorship Program in collaboration with the Tabletop Network and New Voices in Gaming.
We're really glad you're here with us today. We've been going through the life of a game. We went from design to art to graphic design, and we're here now that you've got your game all set to go. We're here to talk about pitching, right? You got to sell this game, get it out there to people, get it in the right hands. And with us to talk about that subject is Sydney Engelstein, head of game development at Indie Game Studios and head of new game acquisition at Stronghold Games and Indie Boards and Cards. Someone who definitely knows a thing or two about this subject. So let's bring Sydney on.
Hi.
Hey, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. You know, this is when we approached you and asked you for a topic and you came back with pitching in the era of social distancing, boy, that is just perfect. I know a lot of people are trying to figure out how do I do this? You know, the conventions are not really here anymore and people are finding some clever ways to work around that. But we're really excited to hear your perspective on this. And I know a lot of our members are definitely taking notes here.
Yeah, and I mean, it's really self-serving because these are the people who are pitching games to us. And so I want you all to do the best you possibly can.
Awesome. Well, it sounds like everybody's a winner here.
Yeah. We will do a Q&A at the end. So for everybody who's watching, you're welcome to drop your questions when you think of them into the chat, and we'll ask them all at the end. But you can also save them for the end, and we'll make sure we get through as many of them as we possibly can.
Awesome. All right, fantastic. Already getting a lot of highs here from people in the chat. Wonderful. All right, Sydney, are you ready to go?
Yeah.
All right, we're going to turn it over to you, and we'll be back for that Q&A. All right.
Hi. I'm Sydney Engelstein. As Mike and Grace said, I'm the head of game development at Indie Game Studios, which is the parent company of both Stronghold Games and Indie Boards and Cards. And in addition to doing game development and wearing a few other hats, I'm also the head of acquisitions, which means that all new game pitches come through me first, and I'm sort of the first line of defense to figure out if a game is something we're interested in publishing or not interested in publishing. And I get into my email inbox maybe about 100 game submissions every 2 weeks. So there is just a ton of competition out there. There's a ton of people designing board games and looking to get their board games published. And so that's a lot of noise for you to cut through to make sure your game has the best shot of being noticed by a publisher and picked up, which is what I'm here to talk to you about, is some sort of tips and tricks of the best ways to pitch your game so that it will make publishers very happy, and happy publisher is more likely to respond positively to your prototype. So, as I heard, you have already had a bunch of talks previously in this series about the first steps you're going through with your game. You've finished designing it. You might have some preliminary graphic design just so that it's playable. You have a prototype, all of these things. This is obviously the first step before you want to pitch your game, is that you want to have a game, which sounds, I would say, pretty self-explanatory, except I have had a lot of pitches from people who consider their game 80 to 90% complete. You know, oh, I'm still fiddling with this mechanic, but the convention came up, so I wanted to schedule an appointment, and I'm still play testing it. Those kinds of things where people are looking to have further work done on their game, even though they're pitching it to a publisher. And now that we do not have these conventions, the expectation is that the game that you're submitting to a publisher through an email is fully and completely complete. That doesn't mean a publisher won't change things about it if it ends up getting signed, but you as the designer should feel confident that if the game was put on shelves tomorrow, it would be exactly what you want it to be before you start reaching out to publishers. The reason for that is, one, it shows that you're competent. We can trust you as a designer to know what your game needs. It doesn't inspire confidence if we think, you don't know some of the things that are wrong with your game, or that you can't get it to the point of being sellable. And also, it provides less work on the publisher's end, because any amount of time we have to spend fixing up a product is more money that it's being put into it and worse profit margins. So a game that is basically ready, you just need to dust it off and send it into production, is going to be much more likely to be picked up by a publisher, because it's less overhead, less investment on their side. So say you've got your game, it's ready, you're sure it's ready to be submitted to a publisher. How do you figure out where to submit it? Most publishing companies have email addresses. Customer service emails can be utilized. You can ask them how to submit games. Some companies like ours have submission portal emails. And these are the kind of things that could be found out on a game company's website. There are also communities, like I'm part of the Facebook group, the Game Designers Guild Facebook group, which has a lot of game designers in it, in addition to some publishers in it. And that can be a good resource to ask other people if they know how to contact certain companies. You know, do you have an email address? You know, have you ever pitched to XYZ game company? Did you have an email address for that? These are the kinds of ways that you can figure out where to submit your game. The secondary question to finding these email addresses through which to get your game in front of publishers is to figure out which publishers you want to pitch to, because not every game publishing company is created equal. On your end, there are some with better reputations than others, you know. Make sure that you're comfortable with the kind of contract you're going to get. From our end, every publishing company has certain kinds of games that they specialize in, and you want to pitch to the one that matches the kind of game you're showing them. It may seem easier to just spread your net really wide and submit your game to every publishing company you can get an address for, but I would recommend against that. Not for this game, but for games in the future. If you start sending things to publishing companies that are not well suited to them, that they have to take the time to reject, and shows that you didn't actually put thought into if this game company would like the product that you're showing, the acquisitions manager, me, could remember your name. And that's not a good first impression to make, that you aren't willing to, you know, try and appeal to the actual company that you're submitting to. Most game companies, even ones on the larger side, like indie game studios, have very few employees working at them. So generally, it's the same person going through all your submissions. And you want to make sure that you're only submitting to them if you're going to put your best foot forward and show that you're a conscientious person who they might want to work with in the future on a project that would suit them. Some of the things that you should think about for your game, for if it matches up with a publishing company, is the genre, the player count, the amount of time that it takes, and also the feeling, sort of the vibe, the theme. You know, is it the kind of game you'd bring to a party? Is it the kind of game you'd sit down with, you know, really serious gamers and play for a few hours? And then look for companies who have similar games to those in their line. Not only is it more likely that a company will sign a game that's similar to games they've already published, so that's good for you, it is also more likely to sell well if you give it to a company who will know what to do with it. For example, Indie Boards and Cards specializes in games with, you know, 3 to 8 players that play in under an hour and have a lot of discussion between the different players. When people see that Indie Boards and Cards puts a new product up on our Kickstarter, that's the kind of game they're expecting. These are people who have liked our games in the past And so they've liked those genres, they've liked those vibes, and they want more of that. You could pitch the best war game in the world. You've designed the greatest war game. But if you pitch it to Indie Boards and Cards and we decide to sign it and throw it up on our Kickstarter, it's not going to find its audience because war gamers aren't subscribed to our email alerts. They're not interested in our previous line, so they won't find it. It won't sell, and it'll be bad for both us and you. That's the reason why it's very important to make sure you're only sending your game to companies that are going to have it match up with the kind of products that they're already good at selling. Of course, that probably has a lot of overlap. You know, a lot of different companies have similar board games that they've produced. So multiple submissions or submitting the same game to multiple companies at once is totally valid and probably a smart way to go about it, considering that so few games can be selected by each company. But you don't want to submit just willy-nilly without thinking through if a game company is actually going to be able to sell the game that you're pitching. Because worst case scenario, a game company that doesn't realize they won't be able to sell it could sign your game, it goes nowhere, and now the IP is out of your hands. So, you're ready to send your email. Let's talk about what should be in that email. I'm going to put in a special note here about gender-neutral language, because nothing puts me in a worse mood than being referred to as sir or reading through a description of a game using he, him pronouns because of the assumption that only men work in the games industry or play games. That's a bit passé these days, and generally the greeting can be gender neutral, like just hello, or hello, Stronghold Games, hello, Indie Boards and Cards representative, and then using they, them pronouns for gender neutrality in any explanation of the game that you're giving. That one's just a tip. Other things you should have in your email. The body of the email can be a short description of your game. It doesn't need to be very in-depth, and in fact, it shouldn't, because that should belong in your sell sheet, which we're going to go over in a second. But what is very nice is showing that you've done that legwork we just talked about in step 1. Maybe you say, I'm pitching XYZ game, which is a light cooperative game that I think would match well with Coup or the Resistance or other games that have already been published by this company, showing that you've put in the time and thought of why it belongs in this company's product line. That's good because, one, as I said, it just reflects well on you as a smart person, a person who is taking the time to consider the time investment of the publisher and why they should be interested. And additionally, it could reflect well on your game. Maybe if I had just read a description of your game, I wouldn't have thought about it in relation to a published IP we already have. But since you brought up the similarities, I'm thinking, oh, we do need a new game to revive that, or we have a large audience for that which would be interested in something else in the same universe. This could be being handed to me on a silver platter, a great selling point for it, which obviously every publishing company wants to know why the game is going to make them money. And this is a way to insinuate that it will be a more successful game because of that legwork that you did. Another thing that you should not put in your email, and this is personal preference for sure. I can't speak for every acquisitions officer, and some companies, if you find guidelines for submission, may ask for it. But I would prefer to not have a rule book attached to an email sent to me. For one, it's a large time investment on my end. As I said, I get a lot of submission emails, and reading through a rule book is just a lot of work and a lot of time, and it doesn't reflect positively on the game. And make me want to respond more positively to it. This is sort of twofold. One, rulebooks are not very good at making a game sound fun. Generally, they're involved in the minutia of how things interact with other things within the game, the intricacies of the mechanics, rather than going over why they're fun, how it feels when it's being played, all of which are much more important to a publisher and reflect much better on the game. An FAQ of how the mechanic might be misplayed and what intricacies there are is less valuable to me for knowing if the game is fun to play. I want a testimonial as to the experience of the game, what it's like and what's special about it, rather than slogging through the entirety of the necessary rulebook. The second half of it is that basically all the tips that I'm giving you are about thinking of the convenience of the publishing company. I know your game is super special to you, and it should be. You should love it. You should put all your time and energy into it. But you also need to recognize the fact that it is one of many when it's coming to a publisher, and they have to split their time between a lot of different things, different games and different submissions that are trying to get their attention. So any additional hoops you make a publisher jump through in order to find out more about your game or respond positively to your game, if you make them read more or you aren't upfront about all the different selling points, the less likely it is for them to think putting in that time is worth it. Because it's just one of many things that the publisher has to do. And so the more convenient it is for them to say, well, why not try this game? Why not push it onto the demo phase? Because there's very little investment required in that, because this person has already shown they know that it's a game that's good for our line. This person already provides a way for us to try it. You're much more likely to get to that next step because it's just easy for the publisher. And the last big thing that I think you should include in your email is a sell sheet, which I hope some of you have heard of. But I'm going to go over in more detail what makes a good sell sheet and what you should try and get your sell sheet to look like, because it is the most crucial part of the game pitching process. Basically, your sell sheet is everything you have to give to a publisher to get noticed by them. The email is nice, it can add a little bit, but the sell sheet is where you have to clinch the deal. So, what's a sell sheet? It's a sheet of paper that has information about your game on it. It's basically like an advertisement. You might have made these in the past, even before social distancing required email submissions instead of meeting people at cons, because a lot of people bring printed out sell sheets to conventions and hand them to publishers to try and get their attention and get them to sit in with a meeting for them. And the nice thing about this talk that I'm doing right now is that actually all of this stuff will continue to be relevant even after, hopefully, conventions come back. Not just for people who can't go to conventions, but we take email submissions year round, and these tips and tricks for how to send in these email submissions and get prototypes to publishers without meeting them in person is something that will continue to be relevant and continue to be something you can use when you finish designing your game and are ready to pitch it anytime. So anyway, back to sell sheets. A sell sheet consists of 3 parts: fluff, stats, and marketing, which are names I made up, but I find them helpful. The first section is fluff. This is anything that makes your game have a little bit of oomph, a little bit of pizzazz. This includes making your cell sheet look nice. You could add a picture of your game or interesting components. Remember that it's only one sheet of paper, so you don't want the pictures to take over the space, because then you'll have less room to explain your game. Putting a little bit of time into nice graphic design of your cell sheet is probably more important than putting time into making your prototype really fancily graphically designed, because publishers are going to be forced to see your cell sheet. That's your first step. And if you don't get that foot in the door, they're never going to see all the work you put in to making your prototype really pop. You need to put the same amount of effort into making sure that cell sheet looks professional, looks eye-catching, has those pictures that make your game look really cool. Table presence is a huge part of the board game industry now. Can you capture that and put it front and center so that the publisher is interested? The other half of Fluff is obviously the theme, the story of the game, that paragraph you put at the beginning of your rule book explaining that everyone is undersea deep divers going for treasure, or whatever it's about. Fluff is important and game themes are important, but I would urge you not to let it, again, take over your cell sheet. Some people are really attached to the story of their game. They've created whole fantasy worlds with, world building details that are, come out in their game, and they're very invested in the storyline, which to me as a publisher is generally a bad sign. If someone is really invested in the story, usually they're more invested in getting a story across than the actual game mechanics. And the story is always going to be more interesting to you, the creator of the story, than it is to a player who just wants to have a fun game. Additionally, a lot of time when you sign a game with the publisher, the theme will be changed in order to match up to market expectations. So maybe it will become something that's more popular right now, or maybe it will be changed to match the theme of a game that already exists in that publisher's portfolio. So for instance, like I said before about Coup, has the dystopian universe, which has several hidden identity games, all set in that same universe art-wise. They're by different designers and were pitched to us at different times. But by connecting it back to a game that our customers are already interested in and saying, oh, it's part of this extended universe, it's the same art, it's a similar kind of game, trust us, it has a better foothold in the market. It has a leg up on new things that people don't know if they're going to like a lot or not. And so you can't be too attached to a theme that it would be a deal breaker if it had to change. And having a cell sheet that's primarily fluff makes the publisher think you're either really attached to the fluff, or the fluff is more interesting than the game if you're taking more time to describe that than you are to describe your mechanics. It doesn't inspire confidence. Okay. Part 2 of a cell sheet is stats. This is a lot of times. I see that Tabletop Network just added a Google Doc of some cell sheet templates, so hopefully this will be present there. I don't know. Usually I see it in a box to the side or a box in the corner, separated off, because this is basically everything you'd see on the side of a box. So, player count, amount of time it takes. If it's relevant, you could put age there, which is generally you would put that if it's a kid's game and you're interested in marketing it specifically to kids. If it's just a game that will probably be in all ages or all ages over 12, you don't have to put it. This is also where you put, in addition to those kinds of stats, a list of the general mechanics of your game. So that might be things like cooperative, worker placement, set collection, auction mechanics, anything that you would find on the Board Game Geek list of mechanics. This is a component of letting the publisher decide if your game matches up with the portfolio that they already have. You could, as I said, pitch the best war game in the world to us, and we would not publish it because we are not a war game publishing company. And so having the stats there is a shorthand to let the publisher know sort of what they're in for, what kind of game it is, what games it relates to, how they can picture it in their head, like, oh, it has similar mechanics to this game I've played, so now I have a better idea of what it is, and I know if I can just say no because we don't like games with those kinds of mechanics. For that reason, I would suggest if you have a mechanic in your game that you're sort of teetering on the edge of whether it counts as being part of that category. Obviously, categorization of mechanics is already a bit of an art, not science. And you're like, well, it could be seen as worker placement, but the feeling of it that it creates is not really like worker placement. You probably don't want to put it on your mechanics list, and instead you'll want to go into greater detail in your marketing section, which is the third section I'm going to get to in a second, because you want the mechanics list to reflect the feeling of your game so that the publisher can get a quick idea of what they're getting into with your prototype, what sorts of people it would appeal to, what audiences it would appeal to. The final thing that goes in stats is a list of components. This doesn't have to be super comprehensive, but it's there to give the publisher a rough idea of about how much this game would cost to produce. That's another factor of which company will publish a game. Indie Boards and Cards tends to publish games that are $40 or less, so smaller box games. And obviously there are exceptions, but looking at the kind of box size, the kind of pricing that companies have on their games is another factor that you want to consider, because that might be a reason they write your prototype off without even giving you a chance. Because if I look at your components list and it's edging $300 a box, you know, there are games out there that sell for $300 with a lot of success, but we don't have access to that market. So that's another thing that's about incompatibility with the publisher you're sending it to, and putting that in the stats section of your sell sheet can be helpful so that they can visualize what they're getting into with your prototype. The third section of a sell sheet is the most important section of all. It's the marketing section. This is a set of plain words paragraphs where you're explaining your game and how to play it. Not in a rules way, more in a marketing way. It should be an advertisement. Canyon Run is a fast-paced cooperative game where players try to get their wagons to the other side of the canyon before the rocks fall on them, for instance. So you're saying it in sentences, but you're trying to get across the way that the game plays in those sentences. And I would urge you to be as upfront as possible. I have read a lot of sell sheets where the designer is either not confident in explaining their mechanic or trying to keep it almost a secret, like they want to lure you in without, like, oh, I'm going to tease a little bit of my most interesting mechanic to lure the publisher in and make them more interested. That is the opposite of what you want to do. You don't want to keep any secrets. You want to put your best foot as far forward as you possibly can. Be as clear about the things you think make your game the best as you possibly can. Because as I said before, it's about convenience. If you make the publisher have to respond and say, so what is that unique worker placement mechanic? Because you just said the words, I have a unique worker placement mechanic. That doesn't tell me if it's actually something we're interested in or if it's actually something I find unique, you know. Then I have to send another email, say, could you explain your game again? You're probably not going to get that email. That is almost certainly going to be a pass, because that's the amount of time investment that other prototypes aren't asking from us. And again, it doesn't inspire confidence that the person didn't come out right up front, say what made their mechanic unique, so that we could judge for ourselves. The two things that you definitely want to be upfront about, like I was saying before, unique mechanics. The one thing every single publishing company wants, I don't care which publishing company they are right now, is uniqueness. It's something different than what's on the market right now. Because, as you all know, the board game industry is just inundated with new titles and new designs. And it's really hard to make anything stick or anything cut through the noise and have a real sales impact. Which is why it's so dangerous to sign new prototypes. Even really good games get overlooked. What a game needs now is a selling point. And selling points are usually things that make it different than other games that currently exist. Why this game and not that game? Why this game and not every other game? So if you are designing a game and are going to pitch it, figure out what makes your game different from all other games. I feel very Jewish saying that. But every game should have something that makes it unique. If your game doesn't have anything that makes it unique, I would recommend working on it some more before pitching it to publishers, because it sounds like you're copying someone else's game. It doesn't have to be a totally new mechanic either. It could be, oh, well, nobody has done, you know, worker placement and auction combined in this specific way. You know, there's a lot of worker placement games, a lot of auction games. I don't know if there actually is one of these. I'm just using it as an example. But the way that I combine them is what's interesting. Great. Lead with that. Say, you know, this game combines worker placement and auction in this way. You know, you do this, which provides this feeling, which is fun for this reason. Because the second thing you really want to be upfront about in your marketing paragraph is what makes your game fun. A lot of times that's tied to what's unique about it. Why do people want to play it? What feeling do people get when they play it? What sorts of atmosphere is created? You know, is it really intense, thinky game that people who like Euros would like figuring out the puzzle of how to maximize their points? Is it the kind of game where everyone's laughing and at the table and there's a lot of chatter and it makes a great story? These are the kind of things that a publisher wants to know, both because it makes your game sound like something we could market and sell to people, and also, again, because we need to know if it matches with our portfolio. Do we sell games to people who want that thinky atmosphere and heads down kind of gameplay? Or do we sell to party gamers who want to be laughing as they play? So those are kind of the big points of your marketing paragraph that you don't want to hold back. You want to be right up front with why your game is different than other games and why that makes it something fun that people would want to pick up in stores. So that's your sell sheet. That's what you want to attach to your email when you send it into a publisher. And the last thing I'm going to go over is one more thing that I do recommend having in your email. In the body of the email is a little sentence, just one, about how the publisher could learn more about this game. For example, if you're interested, I have a print and play that I could send you the files. You know, or if you're interested, I've already made a tabletop simulator mod that we could set up a time to try it. Anything like that, where again, the publisher doesn't have to go to you and get you to come back to them with another email chain saying, oh, I'm interested, how do I learn more? But instead, they're right there and able to do it as conveniently as possible. So if they were on the fence like, oh, this mechanic does sound unique, but it's hard to know without playing it, and then they check your email and you said you have a print and play ready to go, that's only 3 more seconds, that they have to take to print it out, and then just the time for the team to play through it. That makes it way more convenient and way more likely it'll hit the table. And that's what you want to do, is you just want to get your game on the table in front of publishers. Because ideally, if you've done a good job doing your research and figuring out which publishers would be interested in your game, and I assume you've all designed wonderful games that everyone would want to publish, once the publishers play it, then they will know and they will actually see the worth of your game. The difficulty is in getting to that table and convincing the publisher that this is the game that they want to spend their time on, because there is so little time and so many prototypes. So I'm going to go over really fast a couple of different ways you can get that prototype in front of a publisher. So I already said Tabletop Simulator. The pros of Tabletop Simulator or Tabletopia or any of those online board game emulators is it's pretty much the closest to a live convention demo that you can possibly do. Usually you're on like a video call with the publishers. You get to talk through your game. You get to pitch it as you play and make sure they're seeing the best version of it. Maybe I would recommend, if you have cards, you stack the deck so that the cards are coming out in the best order to represent your game, and so that you can explain the mechanics as it comes out. The negatives is Tabletop Simulator or online emulators. They tend to make a game longer. They tend to make a game more difficult to control because of the need to use your keyboard and mouse. It's less intuitive than having a board game in front of you. If you have a really long game or a really fiddly game, a game with lots of intricate components, it might leave a bad taste in the publisher's mouth just from the playtest being so difficult to control, and they're not actually looking at your game. They're just getting fed up with the fact that it's difficult to utilize the program. Additionally, on the other end of that spectrum from complicated games is really easy games can also be tough to do on it if it relies a lot on player interaction, talking, hidden roles, table chat. These can be difficult things to accomplish over an online emulator. The second way that you can get your prototype in front of publishers is print and plays, which is basically just PDFs of all your mechanics that we can print out here, cut up, and play with a cardstock version. Pros: the publishers get to play it as it was intended, in person, face to face, and also it's very easy. It doesn't require any real money investment. We can just print it out and play it, so we can get it from submission to table very fast, which, like I said, convenience is a really good a good thing to have in these pitches. The cons is, again, is this the kind of thing that's going to work with your game? Is there a really unique type of component that won't print well onto cardstock, or a tactile nature that you're going to lose? Are you going to lose the table presence of it? Are there so many components that making a publisher print and cut through all of those components is going to be more trouble than just sending them a normal prototype? These are the kinds of things you need to think about before you decide if your game is a good print and play or maybe not so good a print and play. Additionally, if you're sending a print and play, you need to make sure your rule book is clear enough that the publishers can follow it without you there explaining it to them. During a demo, you're going over the game in plain words and explaining and demonstrating how it's played sitting there. When you send your game to a publisher, it needs to stand on its own, and it needs to have a rule book that lets the publisher play it as intended and not get confused over it. So I assume all of you are very familiar with play testing. I'd recommend doing some play testing where the players aren't taught the game by you, but instead have to read through your rule book and learn it for themselves. And from that, you can learn anything that you might have written in a confusing way that a publisher might get tripped up on, and then play the game wrong and not see the product that you intended. And the third and final way is obviously having a real physical prototype, putting it in the mailbox and sending it off to a publisher. This is definitely a valid way. The pros are obvious, basically the opposite of everything I said for print and play. You get the tactile nature, you get the table presence. The publisher is playing the game exactly as you intended and as you saw it, and as all your playtesters, who I assume gave you positive feedback, saw it too. The cons are the time investment, both on the publisher's end, but also on yours. It's a little easier for us because we don't have to make the prototype, but it can take a long time in a slow cycle of production to get around to playing prototypes. Are you prepared to have your prototype gone for months while a publisher gets around to playing it? Do you have more than one if you're submitting it to more than one publisher? Did you put a lot of money into creating the components and it will be a problem if you need to make more than one, or if you don't get that production copy back from the publisher? Because it truly can be a few months after you send in a game before the publishing company has the time to test out that prototype. And that's sort of the final note I want to say, is that these days things are going slower than ever. All board game sales, except things that already have built-in audiences, are down, and it takes longer to go through all of our production cycles already than it was already a slow process, and now it's a slower process. So even though you might not hear back from publishers, or it might be slow going with publishers once you're ready to submit, just know that it's the cogs are turning. They're always turning, and not to get discouraged, and to keep working hard to put your best foot forward and get noticed by publishers, because even if it takes a very long time, I really believe that all your games are great and will find good homes at different publishing agencies. Thank you very much. I think you're muted.
Thank you.
Wow, that was amazing. You have such valuable information, and it could not have been presented more clearly. That was so useful.
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear it.
I took a bunch of notes, and I was working on my sell sheet while you were in that section.
I'm really looking forward to an improvement in sell sheet quality.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. We did put a link there in the chat for a template just to get you started. If you're, don't know the first thing about making a sell sheet, take Sydney's advice, grab that, and edit it the way you want. All right, so we're going to go into Q&A for the talk. Sydney's around for a little bit to answer your questions. I know we have one or two already in the chat, but while we give people a chance to type the rest of their questions, I wanted to ask, you had mentioned earlier in the talk about, submitting to multiple companies at the same time, right? Mm-hmm. Totally fine thing to do. When I started designing and was researching, how does the pitching process even work? How do you get your game to companies? I heard so much advice that was told with a capital A, that you should only submit to one company at a time. And if you're going to move on to another company, wait till you get a rejection. And right, you're shaking your head.
I don't recommend that.
Right, that seems bananas to me to do that. But it was told as it was gospel truth. I was wondering, are there any myths that you've encountered that designers are like, oh, you should definitely do that or don't do that? that just aren't true, you know?
I don't know if I can think of any myths, but just on your point of not submitting to multiple companies, there is really no part in the process until you've signed your contract that you can't have other companies looking at it. You know, even if you send a physical copy to a company, don't assume that they have then any pull over, any say over keeping it. We have prototypes that we, you know, somebody demoed it to us. We said, wow, we're really interested in this. Can we keep it while we figure out how to get it in the production cycle? And they said, yes, but we still haven't gotten it in our production cycle because of COVID. They still own that. And if they're interested in moving to another company that's hypothetically moving faster with it, you know, they haven't signed a contract. They're perfectly allowed to do that. So just think of what's best for you and your schedule and what you want to do with your game. You aren't beholden to a company just because they've showed interest in your prototype.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes so much sense. And I appreciate getting that on the record for the rest of time. Just
don't break your contract, though.
Right,
Contracts are different. But for
exactly.
pre-contract, there's, you know, a social script that you are allowed to be dissatisfied with the way you're being treated by a publishing company and move on and look for a different publishing company if you're interested.
Fantastic. All right, we're going to go to a question here from, I think Alex was the first one here.
Yep, Alex Cannon has a question. I'm going to pull it up here. What do you think about including an introduction or how to play video in your pitch email?
I've seen a lot of how to play videos, and they can be really great. But the ones that I've seen generally suffer from the fact that they're more of a rules walkthrough than, again, like I said, a marketing pitch where you go straight to what's interesting about your game, what's fun, and they're more like, here's the turn structure. You know, first you do this, and you place your guys here. I feel for your initial pitch email, a video that you're including can have some rules explanations and mechanic explanations, but it should be focused on getting across why that's fun, why that's interesting, why it'll sell, rather than, you know, a how to play video, which can be very long and difficult to get through and not reflect, even in all that time, as well on your game as a marketing video would.
Interesting. So almost like a visual sell sheet.
Yeah, just everything being focused towards as soon as possible in the video, going over the selling points of your game.
Fascinating.
Should we pull ourselves off here and give Sydney full room to answer some more questions?
Sure. We've got another question here from N20 Games, and we'll let you go to get going with these questions. We got a lot of them. All right.
Cool. So generally the name of the person who looks through submissions is acquisition, but you can find customer service emails generally the easiest because most companies have themselves open to customer service, and that would be a good place to ask, do you do open submissions, and what would be a good email to send my submissions to? Could be something you ask a customer service email. I don't think this is very necessary. It's more important that the publishing company thinks that they could sell it to their own audience. A lot of times it's hard to gauge how much of an actual audience is the audience that a designer has accrued for themselves, because it's usually within a friend group, or not, you know, not just a friend group, but a community, a shared community, and that isn't always representative of the kind of community the publishing company themselves will reach. It's not a bad thing to include, you know, we've brought this game to these places and all these people seemed really interested, or maybe the demographics of people who seemed really interested. But I don't think putting a lot of time and effort into promotion before you get signed is really something that's necessary. If theme is central to the game, I don't think there's anything wrong with emphasizing it. Most of the fluff paragraphs that I get concerned about is when it's just a, you are a mage in the world of Exandria and you are finding your way to the hidden apples. That sort of paragraph where there's nothing included in it except the storyline or the theme of the game. If your theme is really important to the mechanics and the fun of it, build it into the marketing paragraph. Say, Canyon Run is a game with all the heart-beating excitement of running through a canyon on a wagon that's lost its axles, and you have to gather the magic wagon stones, by doing this thing, and put it in that way so that it's more of an active demonstration of how that theme adds to the fun, and what about that theme makes it more fun, and makes it more unique, and makes it something that's sellable. I went over this a little bit. I think video sell sheets are cool, but you want to keep them concise. The nice thing about a sell sheet is that it's 1 page long and can be glanced over, and you don't want to start thinking, oh, the more I put in here, the better, and I've captured the attention of the acquisitions officer, and they have to pay attention, because they can just close out of your video if you don't lead with things that will make them interested. And also don't forget to include all the stats information, the type of people that the game appeals to, the player count, the time, because that's important considerations for the publisher to put in. No, it doesn't need to include teaching time. I would say, I can't imagine a time where it would be really relevant. That's the kind of thing that if it is exceptionally long, that might be a problem for the publisher, and in the development cycle, they would figure out a way to adjust it so that it was shorter. But you don't need to say it in teaching time, just playtime. I am not very much in charge of contracts, so I do want to add a lot of grains of salt to my answer to this question. But a couple of things that you might want to be interested in looking for is there's sort of 2 different components of getting paid for your game. There's upfront money, and then there's royalties money. So if you want more money for signing, like just here's the bonus, then you'll negotiate a smaller percentage on each game that sells. Or if you really think you're going to sell a lot of games, you might want to negotiate for a larger percentage on each game that sells, and then you'll get a smaller just lump sum for the original design. Other things you might want to keep in mind is if you really have big dreams of this game getting spin-offs or the IP being really valuable, you might want to make sure that you hold on to that, or right of first refusal for designing the next game in the series. If the publishing company decides they want to design the next game, they could bring that to another designer unless you make sure that you have the first chance to design the second game. Yep, those are both true. Oh. I think this is the kind of thing that you need to sort of decide for yourself which one works better for your game, which will show your prototype better. One way to get around the fact that print and plays have a lot of cutting is, say, your game requires generic tokens. You can just tell the publisher you'll need 20 blue cubes, 20 red cubes, 20 green cubes, instead of sending them lots of little things to cut out, because publishers do tend to have access to a lot of board games and can scavenge for parts, which will potentially make your print and play a lot easier to send to them. But as for which is better, a print and play or a prototype, do you have it on hand? Have you already made the print and play? Is your game the kind of thing that print and play is easy? Is it the kind of thing that you want the physical components that you made, or you want the shape of them and the table presence? That's something you have to decide on a prototype by prototype basis.
All right, so it looks like that's all the questions from the chat. That's really incredible. I have a couple of my own, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So I know for when some of our mentees might not know exactly where to go when looking for what kind of games a company is looking to publish. Like maybe they're looking to publish what they've been doing and selling really well and just getting more of that, or maybe they want to branch out into something else. How would a designer find that information out? Where would they go?
I don't know if there's a specific place like that companies put out lists of games that they're looking for. I know in the past when conventions happened, we've put on Twitter or on Facebook, in that Facebook group I mentioned, the Game Designer Guild, when I was going to be at a convention, I would say, Stronghold Games is looking to set up pitch meetings at this convention. We like games that are, around an hour in length, more than 2 players, stuff like that. But that's much harder to do these days when companies are, they don't have specific times in which to look for new games. But you should be able to find the portfolios of games that companies have already published on their websites or on BGG. There are publishing company like indexes. And if you look at the kind of things they've published most recently, it probably gives you the best idea of the direction they're kind of interested in heading.
Fantastic. There are a few different things cropping up because of the pandemic. I don't know if you probably saw Jay and Sen's pitch project that they were doing, which has been one where it's all online focused, almost like an online pitching convention in a way. Do you want to see, as someone who's head of games acquisition, is that something you want to see more of, even when eventually we do get back to physical in-person meetings?
Yeah, I mean, I think more opportunities for game designers and game publishers to meet up and have like more of an event where they know that they're finding games and finding new games is a good thing, because it's definitely difficult to differentiate from the crowd just from a slow intake of a lot of game submissions over a long period of time. It's much easier to stand out when you have that event where the publisher goes in and say, I'm going to devote this amount of time to looking at these games. You know what I mean? So yeah. I think events like that, especially now when we don't have conventions, and hopefully continuing into the future, will be a thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great point you mentioned earlier about a lot of the stuff is just online. It really is. You have to be in those circles, those groups, where, like you said, Stronghold posts on Twitter or the Game Design Guild, and we'll post a link to that in the chat, because that really is a useful place to be, to chat with other people and get that kind of info. I know I've seen a bunch of companies post that they were taking pitches in there, so that's a really wonderful resource. Yeah. I think we have another question?
We have actually 2 questions that come in. So this one is from Joe. Is there a con to proposing multiple types of prototype presentation, print and play, or tabletop simulator, for example?
Probably not. If you have both of them available, you could say whichever works better for you. I don't think there's any problem with that.
Yeah, options are a good thing.
Yep. And then we have one more question here. If one component is important but impossible to print and play, but everything else is very print and play friendly, could a combination of sending that component and directing them to print the rest be good?
I mean, this is the kind of thing where if it works for you and it really works for your prototype, I'm sure that some companies would be interested in that. But if you're already putting something in the mail, probably it's just as easy for them to get the entire prototype, or it's harder for them to have to wait for that to be sent and then also print and create the rest of the components. So I think the majority of circumstances, I would say, just create your entire prototype so that it matches that one component that can't be print and played. But you know your prototype best, and everything is its own fringe case, and it might be the right solution for you. And it's something you can work out with a publishing company if you get to the point of them asking you to send along a prototype.
Awesome.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think if we don't get any more questions, I believe that's it. And that's been our Sydney, again, thank you so much. This was really fantastic, full of real practical advice, which was, our goal with this speaker series is to give people actionable items to get their games out there, get their projects out there with a good chance of success. And your talk really did that. Like, it was really great.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me. I think this is a wonderful series. I hope it helps everyone a lot.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for coming. And so on that note, we're going to talk about a little bit of the future of the speaker series. We have a couple things coming up.
Yeah. And the first thing we have coming up here is next Sunday, we are releasing a talk from the Tabletop Network Vault from Debbie Moynihan about how to build an audience for your game. And Debbie Moynihan is from White Wizard, so she really knows what she's talking about. This is going to be a really good talk. And we've been doing Q&As with all of these people afterwards. We confirmed those kind of last minute, so keep an eye out on our Discord if you're part of the mentorship program, and we'll let you know there. And then next...
2 weeks from now.
Yeah, 2 weeks from now.
We'll have another live talk. We're going to have Casey from Nib Card Games, and we're so excited to have that. The talk is going to be why the world needs tabletop game hubs, and it's going to have a lot of actionable advice as well on what a tabletop hub is and how to become one, and especially with application for those in other countries, not in the United States. So that's going to be really valuable, really exciting. Again, there will be a live Q&A at the end of that. And when we end this video, we will leave up the title card with the information on that so you can put it on your calendar as well.
Awesome. And once again, thank you to our sponsors, Tabletop Network and New Voices in Gaming for making this speaker series possible. And Sydney, thank you once again for joining us. It was wonderful to have you here, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your Sunday.
Yeah, you guys do.
Thanks.
Thanks so much, y'all.